The Mafia boss asked the black maid for advice as a joke, but her words changed his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin the story. The night had just settled over the city of Chicago, the kind of night where the rich were indulging in their luxury, while the working class could only dream of such indulgence. Inside a grand mansion overlooking the glistening skyline, one man stood out more than the others. Dominic Valentino, the mafia boss who controlled empires and struck fear into the hearts of anyone who crossed him, was sitting in his study, staring out the window as the city buzzed below him. His posture was rigid, the weight of his world always on his shoulders. Yet, tonight, he was restless. He didn't know why. There was a quietness in his home that felt wrong, an unsettling emptiness that even his wealth and power couldn't fill. As he sipped his whiskey, he couldn't shake the thought of his maid, Mariah. She had worked for him for over a year, cleaning his mansion with the same quiet diligence she brought to every task. Mariah was different from the others. She wasn't like the high society women who flattered him with false praise or the men who feared him. No, Mariah was quiet, humble, and strong in a way he hadn't seen in years. He'd noticed her before, of course. He couldn't ignore someone who had spent so much time in his home. But it wasn't until recently that he'd realized there was something more to her than just a maid. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, Dominic had asked her a question, one he thought would be nothing more than a casual comment, a joke, really. He had been complaining about a business deal gone wrong, and said, "Mariah, what would you do if you were in my shoes?" He expected her to laugh it off, to offer some weak reply that would make him feel better, but instead, she looked at him with such seriousness that he was taken aback. She thought for a moment, then replied simply, "I would stop trying to please everyone and focus on what's important. Money and power don't bring happiness, Mr. Valentino. What you need is peace." Her words, simple as they were, stuck with him. It wasn't a response he was expecting from someone of her station, someone who had never lived a life of luxury or control. Yet, there it was, raw and honest. He laughed it off at first, but as the days went by, he found himself replaying her words over and over again in his mind. How could someone like her, someone with so little, offer such profound advice? And why did it feel like a punch to the gut every time he thought about it? Tonight, as he stared out the window, his mind drifted back to Mariah. He wanted to know more about her, what made her tick, how she could offer such wisdom when she had so little to her name. Mariah, he muttered to himself, almost as if saying her name would bring some clarity to his chaotic mind. His curiosity was piqued. He had to find out more. Just then, a soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mariah. "Mr. Valentino, I brought you some more papers to sign," she said, her voice steady but tinged with that same quiet strength he had come to notice. As she entered the room, Dominic studied her more closely. She didn't look like much, a simple maid in her plain uniform, hair pulled back, face unadorned. Yet, in this moment, she seemed almost regal. "Mariah," he said, his voice calm, "I need your advice again. This time, no jokes." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. What is it?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I want to know, what makes you so sure that I'm missing something in my life? Why do you think peace is so important?" Mariah took a deep breath and stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that surprised him. "Because, Mr. Valentino," she said quietly, "you've built your empire on fear and control, but you've never built a life worth living. You've forgotten what it means to truly live, to connect with others, to find joy in the simple things." Her words hit him harder than any punch he had ever taken. He was speechless. Mariah had just turned everything he thought he knew about his own life upside down. But something in her eyes told him she wasn't done yet. "I can't change your world, Mr. Valentino," she continued. "But you can change your own. You just have to be willing to let go of the things that don't matter." Dominic sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. He had everything a man could ever want: money, power, respect. But what good was it if he had no one to share it with? What was the point of it all? As Mariah turned to leave, he called after her. Wait. She paused, turning to face him. He stood up, his heart racing, as the realization hit him like a wave. Mariah, you've changed something in me. I don't know how yet, but I can feel it. She looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I'm glad, she said softly. But don't mistake this for a weakness. You still have to find your own strength. And that's something no one can give you. With that, she left the room, leaving Dominic alone with his thoughts. But this time, it wasn't the usual emptiness he felt. This time, it was the beginning of something new. A change. And for the first time in years, Dominic Valentino didn't mind the uncertainty. I was not sure what to expect when I walked out of that room. But the weight of the Mafia Boss's words had settled over me like a cloud I could not escape. It wasn't just the compliment he had given me, though rare and precious. It was the fact that I had been able to reach him, a man who had built an empire on power and fear. As I walked down the hallway back to my duties, I could feel a shift within myself. His words echoed in my mind. You've changed something in me. I can feel it. That was the most powerful thing anyone had ever said to me, and it had left me questioning everything about who I was and why I had stayed so quiet for so long. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't just the maid anymore. I was someone who mattered. It had always been my role to stay in the background, to do my work without causing trouble. But after that conversation, I wondered if it was time to stop hiding behind the shadows. The next few days were quiet, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. But I could feel the change in the air. Dominic Valentino was different. He no longer looked at me as just the maid. I could see it in his eyes when he spoke to me, a softness I had never noticed before, like he was finally seeing me for who I truly was. I noticed it most during our shared moments when he would stop me in the hall, ask how I was doing, or even simply exchange a quick smile. I could tell he was trying to figure something out, just as I was. I had never seen him this vulnerable, and it unsettled me in ways I didn't know how to explain. I had always kept my distance, afraid of getting too close to someone so powerful, so unreachable. But something about Dominic's sudden curiosity about my life made me want to open up. I hadn't realized how much I had been hiding until I felt the urge to tell him about my past. It wasn't much. Just a girl from the South, working every job she could to survive. A mother who had sacrificed everything for me, and a family that could never quite understand why I had to leave home for this new life. But as I stood there in front of Dominic, I felt an overwhelming desire to share it all, to let him know that I wasn't just a maid. I was more than the uniform I wore, more than the humble work I did. And for the first time, I wanted him to see that. The week passed, and the changes continued to unfold in quiet ways. I could tell Dominic was struggling with something. He was still the same man, commanding, sharp, and powerful. But the walls he had built around himself were beginning to crack. One evening, I was cleaning his office when he walked in. He stood at the door for a moment, just watching me, and I could feel the tension in the air. Mariah, he said softly, his voice unusually calm. I've been thinking about what you said. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. You have? Yes, he replied, stepping into the room. And I think I need to make some changes. I've spent my entire life focused on one thing, control. But I've realized I've been controlling the wrong things. I need to let go of that. I need to focus on the things that matter. His words were simple, yet profound. They were the kind of words I never thought I would hear from someone like him. And in that moment, something shifted between us. I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders, just a little. The hard edges of his persona were softening, and I realized, for the first time, that I wasn't the only one who had been hiding behind a mask. What do you need from me? I asked quietly, unsure of what to expect. He looked at me, his gaze steady and intense. I need your help, Mariah. I've spent so long building an empire that I forgot what it was like to have a purpose beyond that. I need you to help me find it. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The Mafia Boss, the man who controlled everything, was asking for my help. He wasn't just asking for advice anymore. He was asking for something deeper. And in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. I wasn't just here to clean his house anymore. I was here to help him rediscover his humanity. And in doing so, I was rediscovering my own. But even as I agreed to help him, I knew there was a long road ahead of us. A road that would lead us to places neither of us could predict. Dominic Valentino, for all his power, was just as lost as I had been. And together, we would have to find our way. I never imagined that my life would take such an unexpected turn. Just a week ago, I had been nothing more than a maid in a mansion, invisible to the world around me. Yet here I was, standing in front of Dominic Valentino, the mafia boss who had taken notice of me, not for my work, but for something deeper, something I had shared without even realizing its significance. I had never expected that a few simple words could shake his empire or change my own life in the process. But as the days passed, I found myself grappling with the weight of the promises I had made. Dominic had asked for my help, not just in the way he had before, asking for advice like a casual joke. This time, he was asking for guidance in a way that made me feel more like an equal than ever before. And though I had given him my word, I had no idea what that would actually mean for us both. The next few days were filled with quiet moments and subtle shifts. As I continued my daily duties in the mansion, I noticed how differently Dominic treated me. No longer was he the untouchable figurehead of power. He was a man, struggling with the weight of his own choices, looking for something he had lost. I caught him in the halls sometimes, lost in thought, staring out over the city below. He had become a man of contradictions, cold, calculating, yet vulnerable. And with each passing day, I began to realize that I wasn't the only one searching for answers. He came to me one afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting with his associates. His face was shadowed with frustration, his jaw tight, and for the first time, I saw him without the armor of control he usually wore so effortlessly. "Mariah," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I need your perspective on something." He gestured for me to sit, and I hesitated. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes that made my heart race. "What is it?" I asked, sitting across from him. "I've been thinking about the direction of my empire," he began, his voice almost too soft, like he was unsure of how to proceed. "I've built all of this, but what if it's not enough? What if it's empty? What's the point of power if you have no one to share it with? No one who understands you?" His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken regrets. I could feel the vulnerability in his voice, a rawness that startled me. This wasn't the mafia boss I had come to know. This was a man who was questioning everything he had built. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, but then something inside me clicked. The answer, simple as it was, had been right in front of me all along. "Maybe it's not about the power you hold," I said softly, choosing my words carefully. "Maybe it's about the people you choose to let in, the connections you make, not through fear, but through trust." Dominic's eyes searched mine, as if looking for the truth in my words. "Trust," he repeated quietly. "That's something I haven't had in a long time. You don't need to have everything figured out all at once," I continued. "Sometimes, the first step is to let go of control, even if it's just a little bit. Find someone you can trust, someone who sees you for who you really are, not just for what you can do for them." There was a long pause, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I could feel the shift in the air, the beginning of something. Dominic stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're right," he said after a moment, his voice steady. "I've been living in a world where everything was about control, about making people fear me. But I can't keep living like this. I need to change." I looked up at him, my heart racing. I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. Was this the same man who had intimidated everyone in his path? The same man who had built his life on dominance and power? And yet, here he was, admitting that he needed something more. Something real. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to start by trusting the people who are still around me," he replied, his eyes softening. "And that includes you, Mariah." The words felt like a punch to my gut. Dominic Valentino, the mafia boss, was asking for my trust. It wasn't something I had ever imagined, but in that moment, I knew that things were changing. For both of us. The following days were filled with more small changes. Dominic began to trust his team more, to listen when they spoke. He started to delegate tasks instead of taking them all on himself. And as I watched him navigate these changes, I realized that I was changing too. The walls I had built around myself were beginning to crumble, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was more than just a maid. I was someone who mattered. Dominic's transformation didn't happen overnight, and neither did mine. But with every conversation, every moment of trust, we were both taking small steps towards something better, something real. I stood at the door of the office, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been a week since Dominic had asked for my advice, A week since he had shown me a side of himself I never expected. The walls he had built around himself, the icy armor he wore, were slowly crumbling. And every time I spoke to him, every time I offered him a piece of truth, I could feel him changing. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming next. It was a quiet evening, and the usual hum of the mansion seemed almost still. I had just finished cleaning when I saw Dominic standing in the hallway, looking out of the grand window that overlooked the city. He was staring out into the night, his expression unreadable, lost in thought. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it, like he needed something to grasp onto. I walked toward him quietly, unsure of what to say. He heard me approach, but didn't turn around. "Mariah," he said softly, without looking at me. "Can we talk?" The words struck me like a cord being plucked, the tension between us palpable. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Of course." I stepped closer, and we stood side by side, looking out over the city below. The lights twinkled like 1,000 tiny stars, but I felt the weight of the moment, like everything around us was holding its breath. "I've been thinking," Dominic began, his voice low, "about what you said. About trust." He paused, the silence between us stretching for a long moment. "I've never really trusted anyone before. Not fully." I turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Not even your closest allies?" "No," he admitted, finally turning to face me. "Not even them. I built this empire on fear and control, but I've come to realize that it's not enough. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pushing people away." His words were raw, honest, and for the first time, I saw the weight he carried. Dominic Valentino, the man who controlled the city with an iron fist, was standing here, confessing his deepest fears to me, of all people. It was almost too much to comprehend. "But I don't know how to change," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know where to start." My heart softened at his words. This wasn't the man I had first met, the man who exuded power and intimidation. This was a man at a crossroads, lost in his own empire. I had always kept my distance, always remained in the background, but this was different. I could feel the trust between us, the bond that was slowly forming. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," I said quietly, my voice gentle but firm. "Change takes time. But you've already taken the first step by acknowledging it." Dominic looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of hope in them, a hope that I didn't know he had. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice steadier now. "I've been so focused on controlling everything, I forgot how to live. I forgot what it means to be human." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. It was like a door had opened between us, one that had never been there before. We weren't just employer and maid anymore. We were two people, struggling with the same fears, the same desires, and the same need for change. "You're not alone in this, Dominic," I said softly. "We all have our demons to face. But it's how we face them that matters." He looked at me, his expression softening even further. "I don't know what the future holds, Mariah," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But I'm willing to find out. With you." Those words, simple as they were, meant more than anything he had ever said to me. It was the beginning of something new. A partnership, maybe even a friendship, something I never expected from a man like him. "Then let's take it one step at a time," I replied, my heart lightening. One step at a time. For the first time since I had entered his world, I felt like I belonged. Like I wasn't just a shadow in the background, but someone who mattered. And maybe, just maybe, Dominic Valentino was starting to see that too. I stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, watching as the guests mingled and the music played softly in the background. It was another high society event that Dominic had organized, but tonight felt different. For the first time, I was not just a spectator. I was standing beside him, a silent partner in a world I had never truly belonged to. I could feel his eyes on me as he watched the room, but there was no longer that cold detachment. There was something more now, something between us that was new and unfamiliar. It was a shift in our dynamic, something I couldn't quite place, but I could feel it deep inside me. His presence was still as commanding as ever, but there was a vulnerability in him now that I had never seen before. "Are you okay?" Dominic's voice interrupted my thoughts, his gaze softening as he turned toward me. I smiled, nodding. "I'm fine, just taking it all in." He studied me for a moment, his eyes intense, as if he was trying to read my thoughts. You've come a long way since you first arrived here, he said quietly, almost to himself. I didn't respond immediately. The truth was, I had come a long way, but so had he. We were both in the midst of a transformation, but neither of us knew what it would look like in the end. As I glanced around the room, I saw the usual faces, business partners, investors, and even a few enemies disguised behind smiles. But tonight, I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. I was standing beside a man who had changed before my eyes, and in doing so, I had changed too. Dominic had trusted me with his vulnerabilities, something he had never done with anyone before. And that trust had become the foundation of something unexpected. He wasn't just the mafia boss now. He was someone who had opened himself up, someone who was willing to change, even if it meant giving up a little of his control. I've been thinking about what you said, Dominic continued, his voice drawing me back to him. About trusting the right people. About finding peace. I met his gaze, surprised. And? I asked, my heart beating a little faster. He took a deep breath, his shoulders tensing slightly as if he was preparing for something difficult. I've spent so much of my life chasing after power, after control. I thought that was all I needed. But now, I'm not sure anymore. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to be the man who forces everyone around him to bend to his will. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had known Dominic was changing, but to hear him say it out loud, to admit his struggles, it was more than I could have imagined. You don't have to do it all alone, I said quietly, stepping closer to him. He looked at me, his expression softening even more. I've never let anyone in before, he confessed. But you're different, Mariah. I felt my heart race at his words. In all the time I had known him, I had never heard him speak like this. There was a sincerity in his voice that I couldn't ignore. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, but as I looked into his eyes, I realized I didn't need to say anything. I just needed to be there. I reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a simple gesture, but it felt like everything. He didn't pull away. Instead, he took my hand gently in his, holding it like it was something precious. I think I'm ready, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability that made my heart swell. Ready for what? I asked softly. Ready to trust again. Ready to let go of the fear that's been holding me back. There it was. The breakthrough. The moment that we both had been waiting for, even if we didn't know it at the time. He had finally admitted that he was ready to change, and in doing so, he was opening up a whole new world for both of us. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I'll be here, I said. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. For the first time since I'd met Dominic, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadows anymore. I didn't feel like I was just a maid, someone who was invisible to the world. I was someone who mattered. I had a place in this world, and it was beside him. The night continued, but it felt different now. The music, the laughter, the chatter, it all seemed distant. In that moment, it was just me and Dominic, two people who had found something unexpected in each other. The world outside the mansion could wait. We had our own journey to follow, and for the first time, I was ready to walk it with him. I never expected that a simple dinner would turn into a turning point in our relationship, but here I was, sitting at the table with Dominic, the same man who had once been so untouchable to me, now sitting across from me, as if we were equals. The elegant dining room glowed with soft candlelight, the crystal glasses catching the light as we ate, but there was something different in the air. It was no longer just the grandiose setting of a mafia boss's home. It felt like something more intimate, more real. I could see it in Dominic's eyes. He was no longer just observing me from a distance, or seeing me through the lens of his power. He was listening, really listening, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was seen for who I truly was. "How's the food?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual, more relaxed. I looked up from my plate and smiled. "It's perfect. Thank you." He gave a small nod, but there was an unreadable look in his eyes. A moment of silence passed, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world had paused. Then, Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze fixed on me. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Mariah. About trust. About letting go." I placed my fork down slowly, not sure where this conversation was going. He had been quiet for days, mulling over the changes he had been going through, and I knew there was something weighing on him. "What about it?" I asked softly, not wanting to interrupt the fragile moment. "I was wrong," he said, his words surprising me. I spent my whole life trying to control everything, trying to build this empire by holding on to power, by making people fear me. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that it's not enough. It never was. His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. He was admitting something that I had never expected him to admit, especially not out loud. A man like him, used to power and control, was saying that it was all meaningless without something more. You're not the man I thought you were, I said quietly, almost to myself. He looked at me with a soft smile, his eyes not hiding the vulnerability that had taken root in him over the past few weeks. And you're not the woman I thought you were either, he replied, his voice steady but full of something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity or sympathy. It was respect, admiration even. I hadn't seen him look at me like that before. I felt a warmth spread in my chest, and I realized that we had both changed in ways we hadn't expected. I know I've hurt people, Dominic continued, his voice lowering. I know I've made mistakes, and I've pushed people away because I thought that was how I had to be. But I don't want to be that man anymore. I want to do better. I want to be better. I stared at him, at a loss for words. The man sitting across from me, the man who had built his empire on fear and intimidation, was no longer the same man. He was someone who was grappling with his own demons, someone who was trying to break free from the chains he had forged himself. Dominic. My voice caught in my throat as I searched for the right words. How could I express what I was feeling? How could I tell him that I was beginning to see him in a way I had never seen before? That I was starting to see the man behind the power, the vulnerability that he had kept hidden from everyone, even himself? He looked at me, waiting for me to say something, and for a brief moment, I was afraid. Afraid of what this meant. Afraid of what was happening between us. But then I realized that I didn't have to be afraid. This was what I had been waiting for. A chance to see him for who he really was. A chance to see myself for who I truly was. You don't have to be perfect, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You just have to be willing to try. His eyes softened even more, and for the first time, I saw something in him I hadn't expected. Hope. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I've spent so long trying to build something that doesn't matter, he said, squeezing my hand gently. But maybe it's time to build something that does. We sat there in silence, just holding hands, feeling the weight of the moment. There was no need for words. In that moment, I knew we were both ready for something new. We didn't have to have it all figured out. We didn't have to know where this path would lead. But we were walking it together. And that was enough. I had never seen Dominic like this before. The weight of the past few weeks had left its mark on him. And now, as we stood in the middle of the mansion's grand foyer, there was a sense of urgency in his movements. It wasn't the usual controlled precision he exhibited. There was a restlessness to him now, a restless energy that seemed to surge through his every step. He had come so far in such a short time, but the journey ahead of him was far from over. He was still grappling with his past, and now, it seemed, it was catching up with him. Mariah, he said, his voice strained, there's something I need to tell you. I looked at him, noticing the shift in his demeanor. His eyes were clouded, the confidence he usually exuded gone, replaced with something far more vulnerable. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. I've been living in a world where I controlled everything, where I had all the answers. But I don't have the answers anymore, Mariah. His words struck me, and for a moment, I could see the man beneath the facade. Dominic Valentino, the Mafia Boss, was revealing himself in ways I never thought possible. For all his power and influence, he was still just a man, struggling with his own inner demons. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I thought I had everything figured out, he continued, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But it turns out I was just running from the truth. From what really matters. The empire, the power. None of it means anything if you don't have something real to hold on to. His words were raw, and I could feel the weight of them settle in my chest. It wasn't the man I had expected to hear this from, but it was the man I was beginning to understand. The real man, the one who was willing to confront his flaws and let go of his need for control. Dominic, I said gently, stepping closer to him. You don't have to figure everything out on your own. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. I don't know how to stop, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I've spent so many years building this life, this empire. But what if it's all just a distraction? What if I've been running away from the one thing I need most? What's that? I asked softly, my heart aching for him. He looked at me, his expression vulnerable, and in that moment, I knew. He wasn't just talking about his empire. He wasn't just talking about power. I need peace, he said quietly, almost to himself. I need to find peace, Mariah. I need to stop running. The words hung in the air between us, and I could feel the shift happening in him. He wasn't just the mafia boss anymore. He was a man at a crossroads, a man who was ready to leave behind everything he had built to find something real. And somehow, I had become part of that journey. It's not easy, I said gently, and you don't have to do it alone. He met my gaze, his eyes searching mine, as if he was looking for something. For reassurance, perhaps, or for confirmation that what he was feeling wasn't a mistake. Do you really think I can change? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly. I think you're already changing, I said. One step at a time. He was silent for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. But then, slowly, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he took mine in his. I'm scared, he admitted. I'm scared of losing everything, of losing control. But control isn't everything, I said softly. Sometimes, the best thing we can do is let go. He didn't answer right away, but I could feel him processing my words. There was a vulnerability in him now that I had never seen before. He was no longer the man who ruled through fear and control. He was becoming someone new, someone who was ready to face the world without the armor of power he had so carefully built around himself. As the minutes ticked by, we stood there, in the quiet of the mansion, the weight of everything that had been said hanging between us. I didn't know what the future held for either of us, but in that moment, I realized something. We were both on a journey, one that neither of us had expected, but one that we had to take. Together. The world outside the mansion was still waiting for Dominic, still waiting for him to return to the life he had known. But the man standing in front of me wasn't the same man who had walked into my life months ago. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that he was ready for something more, something real. And I was ready to walk that path with him. I watched as Dominic sat at the grand desk in his office, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface, lost in thought. The quiet hum of the mansion filled the space around us, and for the first time in a long while, the atmosphere felt different, calm, almost peaceful. It was a far cry from the tense, chaotic world of power and fear that had once defined his life. The changes he had made, the vulnerability he had shown, were still sinking in, and I couldn't help but wonder where this new path would lead us. We had been through so much in such a short time. And yet, I knew this was just the beginning. Dominic finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but determined. Mariah, he said, looking up at me with an intensity that took my breath away. I've been thinking about everything. About the changes, about us. I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say, but I could see the storm of thoughts behind his eyes. He was grappling with something deeper than I had expected. What do you mean? I asked softly, stepping into the room, my voice steady but full of curiosity. Dominic ran a hand through his hair, his gaze never leaving mine. I've spent my life in control, he began, his voice rough, like he was struggling to find the right words. I thought that power and fear were the only things that mattered. But now I see that I was wrong. I was so focused on controlling everything that I lost sight of the most important thing. I waited, my heart racing. I had never seen him like this. The man who once ruled with an iron fist, who had never shown anyone his vulnerabilities, was standing before me, completely raw. What was the most important thing? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood up, walking towards the window, looking out at the city lights below. Peace, he said simply. Peace, Mariah. I've been searching for it all this time, but I didn't even know it. I thought power would give me everything, but it hasn't. It's only made me more isolated, more alone. The weight of his words hit me hard. I knew he was right. I had seen it in him. The isolation, the coldness that came with being feared by everyone around him. But now, I could see a man who was beginning to understand that control was not the answer. You're not alone anymore, I said quietly, stepping closer to him. You don't have to keep fighting this battle by yourself. Dominic turned to face me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope in them. What do you mean? He asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. You've been there for me, I said softly. And I've been there for you. We don't have to face this alone. His eyes softened, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world outside the mansion had faded away. It was just the two of us, standing in the quiet of the night, learning to trust each other in ways neither of us had ever imagined. "You're right," Dominic said after a long pause. "I've been so used to doing everything on my own, but maybe it's time to stop. Maybe it's time to let people in." I nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "You don't have to change everything all at once," I said gently. "Just take it one step at a time." Dominic walked back toward the desk, his expression thoughtful. "One step at a time," he repeated, almost like he was reassuring himself. "I've spent so long trying to do everything perfectly, trying to control every aspect of my life. But maybe it's time to embrace the uncertainty." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "And maybe it's time to stop hiding from what I really want." My heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had acknowledged his own desires, his own needs, without the shield of power or control. "What do you want?" I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. Dominic took a deep breath, his eyes locked on mine. "I want to stop living in fear," he said quietly. "I want to build something real, something meaningful. I want peace, and I want to build it with you." His words were simple, but they were everything. For the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same page, that we both understood what needed to be done. We weren't just two people from completely different worlds anymore. We were partners, ready to face the future together, step by step. I reached out, taking his hand in mine, and in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect, but we were both willing to try, and that was all that mattered. Dominic squeezed my hand gently, a quiet promise passing between us. "One step at a time," he repeated, his voice full of determination. And in that moment, I knew that we were both ready to take that first step towards something new, something real. I had never seen Dominic look quite like this before. It was a week after our conversation in his office, and things between us had changed. The distance that had once separated us, the unspoken barrier that came with his power and my place as his maid, had begun to dissolve. But with that change came something else, a sense of uncertainty that neither of us had expected. Dominic had taken that first step toward peace, but now it felt like the next steps were harder. We had come so far, but the world outside the mansion was still watching, waiting for him to slip back into the old ways. Tonight, we were in the middle of another one of his business meetings, but the atmosphere was different. Instead of dominating the room, he was listening. Instead of leading with a sharp, commanding voice, he was taking a step back. And I could feel the tension in the air, both from his men and from himself. It wasn't that he had become weak or indecisive. It was that he was allowing himself to see the world in a way he had never allowed himself before. And I could see it in the way his associates were reacting. Some of them were uncomfortable with this change, not sure how to react to a man who had been untouchable for so long suddenly opening up. It made me uneasy too. I was used to seeing Dominic as the one who was always in control. But tonight, I realized that he was no longer the same man. He was different, and it was both exciting and terrifying. "Mariah," Dominic said quietly as we stood at the back of the room, away from the others, watching the meeting unfold. I turned to face him, feeling the intensity of his gaze on me. "You've been quiet tonight. What are you thinking?" I hesitated. It wasn't easy to admit, but the truth was, I was scared. I was scared of what this new Dominic meant for both of us. I had seen the shift in him, the vulnerability he had shown, and I knew that he wasn't the only one changing. I was too. I had always been the one in the background, never stepping forward, never asking for anything. But now, with Dominic's openness, I couldn't ignore the way my own feelings were shifting. For the first time, I wasn't just a maid in his world. I was someone who had become integral to his life. And that scared me. "I don't know what this is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is changing so quickly, and I don't know where we go from here." Dominic studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he reached out, taking my hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything in that moment. "We take it one step at a time," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We've both come too far to go back now." His words brought a wave of relief, but it also brought a deeper understanding. This wasn't just about him changing. It was about both of us changing, about learning to navigate this new reality together. "I'm with you, Dominic," I said, squeezing his hand. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. I never thought I'd hear those words from you. His voice was tinged with something that could only be described as gratitude, and I knew then that he had truly opened himself up to me in a way that he had never done before. We stood there for a long moment, just holding hands, the world outside the room continuing to move at its usual pace. But for us, time seemed to slow, and in that stillness, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been afraid of the changes, afraid of the unknown, but now, standing next to him, I knew that we could handle whatever came our way. The meeting continued in the other room, but Dominic and I remained in our own world, a world that was slowly becoming our own, separate from everything else. And for the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about peace for him. It was about peace for both of us. We didn't need to know what the future held. We didn't need to have it all figured out. All we needed was to take one step forward, together. The world outside would continue to turn, and the challenges would come. But we were no longer alone in this. We had each other. I had always known that Dominic was powerful, but seeing him shift in such a profound way had made me realize that power wasn't just about control or fear. It was about vulnerability. And for the first time, I could see him for who he truly was. The man who had once ruled his world with an iron fist was now someone who was learning to trust, to let go, and to embrace peace. But that didn't come without its challenges. As the days passed, I saw the conflict in his eyes. His old habits, the ones that had made him who he was, weren't easy to shake. There were moments when the old Dominic reappeared, the one who was so used to being in control, the one who pushed people away to keep them from getting too close. It was during one of these moments that I realized how far he still had to go. We were in the garden, just the two of us, walking under the stars. The air was cool, and the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. It was peaceful, but I could feel the tension building between us. Dominic had been distant all evening, lost in thought. I had learned to read him by now, to understand when he was thinking through something important. But tonight, he seemed like he was pushing me away. Dominic, I asked, my voice tentative, breaking the silence. He stopped walking, his back turned to me for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. I don't know if I'm doing this right, Mariah. I thought I could change, that I could be someone different. But there are moments when it feels like I'm failing. His words hit me harder than I expected. He was vulnerable, more than he had ever been, and yet there was a part of him that still clung to the old ways. I stepped closer to him, my heart aching for him. You're not failing, I said softly, gently placing a hand on his arm. You're trying. That's what matters. Dominic turned to face me, his eyes searching mine, as if looking for something, for reassurance. But what if it's not enough? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear that no matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to break free from his past. I shook my head slowly. You've already come so far. You've changed more than you realize. It's not about being perfect, Dominic. It's about taking one step forward, no matter how small. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle in him. The old fears, the old habits, were still there, but I knew that he was fighting them. And that was all I could ask for. I don't know if I can do this alone, he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. You're not alone, I said firmly. You don't have to do this by yourself. He stared at me for a moment longer, and then something in his expression softened. The hard edges of his face, the ones he had worn for so long, began to fade. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, like a weight had been lifted from his chest. I want to believe that, he said quietly, and I do believe it. I just don't know how to trust it yet. I smiled softly, reaching out to touch his hand. It takes time, but you're on the right path. Dominic nodded slowly, his hand still holding mine. Thank you, Mariah, he said, his voice soft. I don't know how I would have made it this far without you. His words felt like a promise, like a bond that had been forged between us in the quiet moments, in the shared vulnerabilities we had both revealed to each other. It was more than just trust now. It was something deeper, something that neither of us had expected, but something that felt right. You don't have to thank me, I replied quietly. We're in this together. Always. We stood there for a long time, the silence between us comfortable now. The world outside seemed distant, almost irrelevant. In that moment, it was just the two of us, standing in the garden, learning to trust, and to let go. The path ahead of us was still unclear, and there would be struggles along the way. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I never expected to be standing here, in the center of this grand room, facing Dominic with the weight of everything that had changed between us. The mansion felt quieter than usual, almost too still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The air was thick with unspoken words, but this time, it wasn't fear or tension hanging between us. It was something different, something that felt like the beginning of something new. We had both come a long way, and yet, here we were, unsure of what the future held. Dominic had opened up to me in ways he never had before, but now it was my turn. I had always been the one in the background, the one who followed, never the one to take charge. But as I stood there with him, I knew that wasn't going to work anymore. It couldn't. If we were going to move forward, we both needed to step into the unknown together. Dominic looked at me, his gaze steady but full of something I couldn't quite read. "Mariah," he began, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about. About trust, about peace, and about what I've built." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. There was a heaviness in his voice, something that made me wonder if he was about to take another step back. But then he surprised me. "I'm ready to let go of the parts of my life that no longer serve me," he said slowly. "And that includes the way I've built my empire." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. Dominic, the Mafia Boss, was saying that he was ready to change everything he had built, everything he had worked for, to start over, to find something that mattered more. I could feel my heart racing. This was bigger than anything I had expected. This wasn't just about trust or peace anymore. This was about reshaping a life, a legacy, a future. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw the full weight of his decision. "It means letting go of the fear that's kept me in control for so long. It means trusting the people around me, including you." He stepped closer, his presence so strong, yet there was a tenderness to it now that I had never seen before. "I've been living in a prison of my own making, Mariah, and I don't want to live like that anymore." I could feel the sincerity in his words, the truth of it. Dominic had spent so much of his life controlling every aspect of his world, and now, here he was, admitting that control had been his prison. And for the first time, I saw the man behind the power, the vulnerability that had been hidden for so long. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment we both needed to decide if we were truly ready for what was ahead. "We can do this, Dominic," I said softly, taking a step toward him. "We can face whatever comes next, together. But you have to let go of the past. You have to trust me, trust us." Dominic stood there, looking at me for what felt like an eternity. The weight of his decision hung in the air, and I could see the internal battle waging in his eyes. But then, slowly, he nodded. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady now. "I'm ready to trust, to let go, to build something new." A sense of relief washed over me, but it was mixed with a deep, quiet understanding. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But we were ready to face them, together. "We'll take it one step at a time," I said, my voice firm, but full of hope. He smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him in a long time. It was small, but it was genuine, and it made something inside me settle. "One step at a time," he repeated. And in that moment, I knew we were both committed to whatever came next. We didn't need to have everything figured out. We didn't need to know the exact path ahead. All we needed was each other, and the courage to take that first step into the unknown. The room around us felt different now. The mansion, once a symbol of power and fear, now felt like the beginning of something new. And as we stood there, side by side, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just following someone else's path. I was walking beside someone who had the strength to change, to build something real. And that was everything. I stood beside Dominic, watching as he took a deep breath and let it out slowly, like he was preparing for something monumental. The weight of everything that had happened, the changes, the trust, the vulnerability, hung between us, but for the first time, it felt like we were both ready. Ready to move forward, ready to face whatever challenges awaited us. We had spent so much time navigating the space between us, learning how to let go of the past, but now, we were about to take a leap into the unknown. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. Dominic had already started making changes in his life, steps toward peace that were as difficult as they were necessary. But now, the real test was whether we could hold on to what we had begun, or if the world outside the mansion would pull him back into the darkness. "You know," Dominic said, breaking the silence between us. "For so long, I thought I had to control everything. I thought that power was the only way. To protect myself, to protect everyone around me. But I see now that the only thing I was protecting was the mask I had built." His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight of his words, the realization of just how much he had hidden from everyone, including himself. I turned to face him, my heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" I asked softly, my voice filled with curiosity and a hint of concern. He met my gaze, his eyes steady but full of uncertainty. "I've been hiding behind this persona, this image of the untouchable mafia boss. But it was just a shield. It kept everyone out, including the people who cared about me." He paused, as if processing the weight of what he was saying. "I thought that being feared was the only way to have control, but now I realize that it only made me isolated." I nodded slowly, my heart aching for him. "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression shifting. "Now, I'm ready to let that go," he said quietly. "I'm ready to live without that shield. I want to build something real, something worth fighting for." His words hit me deeply. Dominic had spent so many years building his empire, but it was all built on fear and power. And now, he was ready to dismantle it all, to step into the unknown with nothing but his own heart and the trust he had begun to rebuild. "And what does that look like?" I asked, stepping closer to him. He gave me a small smile, a flicker of hope in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "It means making peace with the past," he said, his voice steady. "It means choosing people, choosing you, over everything else." There it was again, the shift. He was no longer the man who lived for control. He was a man who was choosing to trust, to let go of the power he had clung to for so long. And for the first time, I saw the man I had always believed in, the one who had been buried beneath the weight of his empire. "I think we're ready for this," I said softly, reaching for his hand. "Ready for what?" Dominic asked, his eyes locking with mine, his voice filled with uncertainty and hope. "Ready to face whatever comes next, together," I replied, my heart swelling with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere, Dominic." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the relief in his eyes. He was finally letting go of the fear that had held him captive for so long, and in doing so, he was letting me in. "You're right," he said quietly. "We'll face it together." The words felt like a promise, and I knew, in that moment, that no matter what happened, we would be stronger together than we ever could have been apart. We were no longer two people walking in separate worlds. We were one, and that was enough. "We don't have to have it all figured out," I said, smiling up at him. "One step at a time." He smiled back, and for the first time in a long time, the weight that had always been on his shoulders seemed to lift. The world outside would continue to turn, but for now, it didn't matter. We had each other, and that was all we needed. And in that moment, I knew that everything had changed. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. It would be full of challenges, full of doubts, but we would face them together. And that, more than anything, was what made all the difference. I had never imagined I would be standing here, at this moment, with Dominic by my side. We had come so far, each of us taking steps toward a future we had never dared to envision. The mansion, once a symbol of power and fear, had become a place of quiet change, of new beginnings. And as I looked at Dominic, I could see that he had changed in ways I hadn't even expected. He wasn't the same man who had walked into my life months ago, the one who ruled with an iron fist and a heart guarded by fear. No, he was someone different now, someone who had learned to let go, to trust, and to love. But it wasn't just him. It was me too. I had always kept myself hidden, always stayed in the background, afraid to take a step forward. But now, I had learned to walk beside him, not as his maid, but as an equal. We were building something together, and it felt real, something neither of us had expected. Dominic stood in front of me, his expression soft, yet filled with the same quiet strength he had always had. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before, peace. The peace he had been searching for, the peace he had finally found, not in power or control, but in trust, and connection. I don't know where we go from here, he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But I know one thing. I looked up at him, my heart racing. What's that? I asked. He took my hand in his, squeezing it gently. I know I don't want to go through this life alone, and I don't want to do it without you. His words struck me like a chord, resonating deep within me. The truth of them was undeniable. This journey, this life, would never be easy. But together, we could face whatever came our way. I don't want to go through it alone either, I said softly, my voice full of emotion. I'm right here, Dominic. And I always will be. He smiled, the first real smile I had seen in what felt like forever, and in that moment, I knew that everything had shifted between us. It wasn't just about the changes we had made. It was about the connection we had found, the understanding that we could face the world together. I had spent so much of my life in the background, unsure of my place, unsure of my worth. But now I knew. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And as we stood there, holding hands, I realized that we were no longer two separate people, struggling to find our way. We were a team. We were stronger together, and that strength would carry us forward, no matter what challenges awaited us. One step at a time, Dominic said softly, the words carrying a weight of meaning between us. One step at a time, I repeated, smiling up at him. And with that, we turned toward the future, ready to face it together, step by step, knowing that whatever came next, we were ready. Ready to build something real, something lasting. Together. In this captivating romance story, a powerful mafia boss begins to face the reality of his past and the changes he must make to move forward. As he slowly learns to trust and embrace vulnerability, he finds solace in a relationship with someone who has always been in the background, his maid. This evolving romance story delves deep into the complexities of love, change, and the journey toward peace. Through moments of tension, emotional breakthroughs, and raw honesty, the characters grow stronger together. If you're a fan of heartwarming romance stories that explore the real, human side of powerful figures, this tale will keep you engaged. The relationship between the characters unfolds beautifully, showing how trust and vulnerability can transform lives. As the story progresses, you'll see how their love story blossoms, challenging the boundaries of their respective worlds. Romance stories like this remind us that real love is built on understanding and accepting each other's flaws, making it a truly captivating read for anyone who enjoys transformative love tales. The bond they share strengthens with every step they take, and it's the kind of story that stays with you long after you've finished reading. If you're in search of deep, emotional romance stories that focus on growth and healing, this one is a must-read.